Good morning. It is January 16th at Senate Judiciary. We have introductions today from the Vermont Network, and we have Charlie coming up first, or Sarah, whoever wants to go first.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good to be back with you all. Sarah, for the record, Sarah Robinson, and I'm the Co-Executive Director of the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And here with my colleague, Charlie Glisterman, we'll be splitting our time a little bit this morning. But I just thought I would start beginning at the biennium with just, again, the 10,000-foot view level of who we are, what we do, what role we play here in the building, and then Charlie will speak a little bit about some of the priorities that we're hoping to advance during the session this year. So thank you again for the time this morning. The Vermont Network is a state's leading voice on issues related to domestic and sexual violence. We are a statewide nonprofit organization, and we're the federally designated coalition of domestic and sexual violence organizations in the state. Every state and territory has a federally designated coalition, like the Vermont Network. And so we are a membership organization, and our members are 15 independent nonprofits that operate throughout the state of Vermont and provide services to victims of domestic and sexual violence. And together, those organizations serve every community in the state. In 2023, our member organizations answered over 23,000 hotline calls from Vermonters across the state and provided in-person services to over 8,000 individuals. Every one of the member organizations looks a little bit different because the communities in Vermont are different, but they all offer the same basic set of services. The first is confidential support. Community-based domestic and sexual violence advocates have a particular form of privilege that's outlined in state statute. It's called crisis worker privilege. And there are many different kinds of victim advocates in Vermont, many of whom are also based in state positions, and they have a different level of confidentiality than the advocates who work for our member organizations. So I always think that that's an important thing to share. Our organizations provide 24-hour access to hotlines or chat lines for individuals to receive support at any time of the day or night. They offer legal advocacy, which is sharing information on legal issues, helping survivors navigate legal proceedings, accompanying them to court, and also making referrals and connecting survivors to low or pro bono representation. We provide emergency and transitional housing. There's a network of emergency shelters that operate across the state. And our programs also operate transitional units to provide more medium-term housing to survivors for up to, say, 2 years. And that really, again, looks a little bit different across the state. And then working with survivors who are fleeing to find permanent affordable housing as well. Our members also provide children's services and a whole host of prevention education. So our member organizations are in schools, working with faith communities, other organizations throughout the state. And in 2023, reached 15,000 Vermonters through their prevention education activities. So that's really the work of our membership. At the Vermont Network, we're based in Waterbury, and we also operate several statewide and direct services programs out of our office. So I thought it would be helpful just for you to have that full view. The first is we operate a small legal clinic, and our attorneys provide both legal advice and representation to survivors across the state. Primarily, we work in the protection order and parentage and divorce spaces, and of course, partner with many other legal providers across the state. We also operate a program called DIVAS, which provides advocacy to people who are incarcerated at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. We actually were able to just do a survey of folks who are living in that facility, and over 90% of the people at Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility have themselves experienced domestic or sexual violence. at various points in their lives, and have experienced often a lifetime of trauma, which is involved related to their justice involvement. So our DVIS program, we have 3 staff. They're in that facility 5 days a week and providing services to individuals that are in that facility. We support the Deaf Vermonters Advocacy Services. They're actually based in Brattleboro at the old Boston School, but they provide victim advocacy to Vermonters who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf-blind. And we also operate the Vermont Forensic Nursing Program. So we train a cadre of trauma-informed and specially trained nurses who provide forensic medical care to victims of domestic and sexual violence, most often in emergency room settings. And finally, we also support the network of domestic violence treatment providers in Vermont. They're called Domestic Violence Accountability Programs. There is a set of standards and a certification process that those programs go through, and they work directly with people who cause harm in their intimate partner relationships to help change their behavior. So there's a lot of work that's happening both at the community level and at the statewide level, and we're glad to be part of it. So I'll hand it over to Charlie to talk a little bit about our priorities for the upcoming session, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Charlie Glitzerman. I am the policy director at the Vermont Network. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. As Vermont's leading voice on domestic and sexual violence, the Vermont Network advocates for policies that seek to uproot the causes of violence and support the well-being of survivors, their families, and Vermont communities. And with that, there are 4 issues on our legislative agenda that we would like to highlight today that may be of interest to your committee. The first is sustainable funding for domestic and sexual violence service providers. The members of the Vermont Network have largely been flat funded through Vermont's Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund for 15 years. The fund's revenue sources, a portion of surcharges on criminal offenses, civil penalties, and marriage license fees, the annual shortfalls, and the Vermont legislature has had to make annual one-time appropriations for several years in a row just to keep the fund whole. And so we see with the increased need for services, complexity in cases, and increased lengths of stay in shelter, on top of inflationary pressures, that this funding is unsustainable. So we're seeking to establish a new and sustainable revenue source for the fund and other investments to meet the need for domestic and sexual violence services. The next is a package to improve vehicle safety and protect survivors' access to vehicles and update definitions related to device-related stalking. The principle behind this legislation is that as technology evolves, our laws also need to evolve with new safeguards for survivor safety and privacy. This legislation includes protections against using GPS tracking apps that are paired with modern cars to stalk or harass a survivor. The second is a change to Vermont's Domestic Violence Protection Order statute to explicitly allow survivors to request possession of a vehicle as a form of relief. And lastly, updated definitions in Vermont's Civil Stalking Protection Order statute to better capture and protect against device-related stalking. Our third issue is related to protections for survivors of coerced debt. Coerced debt is when a person utilizes coercive control, identity theft, or force or manipulation to incur debt in the name of an individual. And this debt and resulting damage to credit scores can really have lifelong consequences for folks and create barriers to housing, education, and employment. And so states like Texas and Connecticut have passed financial protections to provide relief for survivors of coerced debt. So we're advocating for similar legislation to create a process for survivors to request creditors cease collecting on coerced debt and remove coerced debt from their credit report. Lastly, we are seeking to create 24-hour access to sexual assault protection orders. Sexual assault protection orders are a critical legal tool for survivors of sexual violence. And currently, survivors can only request sexual assault protection orders during regular court hours, which leaves them at risk when emergencies happen on evenings or weekends. So we support creating 24-hour access to sexual assault protection orders so survivors have access to these protective measures when they need them.
Carly, if I can interrupt you real quick,
Of course.
the 24-hour access,
Mhm.
that is, I believe, in S9. Is that the, bill?
I don't know the bill number offhand, but yes, it is being introduced both on the House and Senate side.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we got that in here, so that's,
Terrific.
we'll take that up.
Amazing. I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you. Well, that is all I have for you all today. Thank you for the opportunity, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
I do have a question. I'm remembering we had a discussion, I think, last year about coerced debt or coercion as a principle. And as I remember, the gray area was how to demonstrate it or how to prove it. In the legislation that you're thinking of, what's the catchment for that?
Mhm.
In other words, if somebody says this was coerced debt, how would the state understand and have some demonstration of that?
Mhm.
Um,
It's a great question. The bill draft is not yet finalized, so I think some of those questions are still to be determined. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about coercive control, Sarah.
Sure, I think you're
Contract from last year.
absolutely right, Senator Baruch, that we passed a bill last year expanding the definition of abuse for the in the protection order context around the coercive control. And we are hearing from both the courts and from advocates that law is working really well.
Mhm.
So
So we
very
use similar language.
happy to hear that. So we have been looking at that language, and there are other places in state law where essentially entities can affirm that abuse has occurred through various methods. Usually there's a list that there has been a protection order issued, that there have been charges, and there are often other methods as well.
Mhm.
And so again, we're still working out a little bit of the language around that, but expecting that there will be a few different pathways for a creditor or an entity to ensure that the debt was indeed coerced.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you.
I would also just add that some of these situations are really like identity theft situations.
Yeah.
And so some of them I think are very clear cut, and other ones, states, Texas, Connecticut, California that have worse debt protections already,
Mhm.
have great models to support verification of course debt.
Maybe it's just my bias. I'm surprised that Texas is one of these states.
Texas was one of the first I learned to.
Okay,
Mhm.
go Texas.
Yeah,
I just have a-
Senator,
I'm sorry.
oh, speak.
So I had a question, and it may be for you, Charlie, maybe for you, Sarah, but around housing and sort of the increase in funding need. That we are obviously in a housing crisis, and I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of additional funding needs and additional time it's taking to get survivors into permanent housing.
I can speak to that a bit, and just say that it used to be, even, I've been at the network 10 years, it used to be even when I started that individuals would go into a domestic violence shelter and might be there for 30, 60, 90 days as they're kind of stabilizing and finding affordable housing. That's no longer the case. And so because there is such little affordable housing, and of course the pressures are different in different areas of the state, we find that survivors are needing to stay in shelter much longer. Sometimes 6 months, sometimes up to a year. We've had survivors who have been working diligently with advocates to find affordable housing and have had to be in shelter for over a year. And so we're definitely seeing that impact. Our I should just say, as a general rule, all the domestic violence shelters in Vermont are full. So it is rare that there is open rooms, open units that individuals can just easily slide into. We work with the Office on Economic Opportunities not through the GA program, but through a different set of funding to essentially operate shelter overflow at motels and hotels. It's not how we would prefer to provide housing and shelter to victims of domestic or sexual violence. But unfortunately, that is often the only option. So we were at our member organization in Chittenden County a few weeks ago, and they have a very large shelter. It was completely full. They actually had 35 children in shelter when we were there in various families. And they also had 18 rooms at a local motel where they were. It was just simply shelter overflow. So we see that the need has really changed and grown over the past, especially over the past decade. But it remains probably the number one issue that many survivors identify as a barrier to seeking safety in their lives.
Is there ever a circumstance where due to lack of funding or lack of shelter beds that people are being turned away or unable to access the shelter services that they need?
I would say that we work really hard, our members work really hard together to ensure that people at least have emergency shelter. It's the great thing about the network is that our member organizations will work with one another. And so if they are completely full and their overflow space is completely full, they'll try to help place someone in a neighboring county. Of course, that creates lots of barriers to employment and transportation and all the things. I think it is accurate to say that lack of emergency housing and lack of really permanent affordable housing is one of the things that is a primary safety threat to many survivors.
Thank you.
Senator Morris.
Yes, I know you had mentioned funding is also important. This, maybe Senator Ruth has attention. Putting on my other hat, do you fall under any particular state agency's budget, or where do we find that?
Speak to that briefly, and just say it is wonderful to have this conversation in this room, in part because our primary source of funding for our member organizations is the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. It's a special fund. It was established in 2008 by the late great Senator Sears, and that was originally established to simply distribute funds to our member organizations. It flows through the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, but it is truly kind of like an in and out for them. The funds go to them and then they are distributed via a funding formula. And so the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services is kind of where that sits. We were just speaking with the center, and again, right now that fund supports just under $800,000 in expenses. Annually, it's experienced shortfalls every single year for the past many years. Just this year, in this current fiscal year, they're projecting a $175,000 deficit in the fund, just in the current year. So clearly the revenue sources that support it are broken and certainly need to be addressed.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? So we have Jay coming in at 9:30, so we can take a 10-minute break.
Doesn't need anything now.
She's in the waiting room now. Okay. Yeah, we can, if she's ready to go, we can just go ahead and then we can take a break at 9:50 or so for the rest of the folks.
Just wondering, if we click on OK, will that go away in the bottom? Right?
That's what I've been wondering
Yep,
as well.
it does.
I don't know if it's a touchscreen situation or.
It's the operation. Take a risk.
You can.
It's a touch screen.
Hi Jay, are you with us?
I am. I'm just trying to have a different looking screen. So let me just, here we go. Yes, that's it. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for accommodating me. Like I said, I'm, having a couple of appointments in the Upper Valley, and I really appreciate the time that you set aside for me. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the Judiciary Committee. I really am sorry that I can't be with you today. My name is Jay Pershing Johnson. I am Governor Scott's legal counsel. I was invited to testify about my organization's goals, priorities, and requests for the upcoming session, and to talk a little bit about who I am and the role I play. So I think everybody in the room knows who I am and the role I play, but I'm happy to go over that. I advise the governor and the staff on any number of issues that arise day to day. I review everything coming to the governor for approval. I review extraditions for sending fugitives from justice back to the state they have fled and requesting fugitives from Vermont to be returned. And I review every bill the legislature passes. That's kind of a thumbnail because every day is different, which is pretty great. In a larger constitutional context, the governor exercises the supreme executive power under Chapter 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, and is responsible for faithfully executing the laws, which is Section 20 of the Chapter 2 of the Vermont Constitution. So you might hear this from other members of our staff in other committees if they're asked to do something similar. But each of us is a liaison to various agencies and departments. And my liaison responsibility is the various stakeholders in the criminal justice system. So I work most closely with the Department of Public Safety and the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. But I'm also the primary contact for the Defender General, the Office of the Attorney General, and the Center for Crime Victim Services. Other stakeholders, I think, know that they can reach out to me. They tend to reach out to multiple members of the staff. I also work closely with Monica Hutt, the Chief Prevention Officer for the state. She's on the governor's staff. She's the liaison to our Agency of Human Services. And we work pretty closely with the agencies on the intersection of youth behaviors, substance use and mental health, and the justice system. So some of those issues are taking place and being heard in the healthcare committees, other committees, committees other than the judiciary. But we believe that the intersection is close, and I think the tie is critical. So like every year, the reason I am here and the interest of my organization is like every year, our package is intended to address the public safety issues we know our communities and our constituents are facing. Pretty much like last year, in the last 2 years, we have heard from communities that Vermonters want accountability. They're frustrated with what they view as a catch and release system. And they believe untreated drug and mental health issues to be behind much of the crime and disorder that they experience in their communities. You may have heard already in the press that what we're proposing is increased penalties, but that is not true. I think what we are looking to do is work with existing laws, existing institutions, so that they actually work as what you might say is intended. We have lots of laws and we have lots of procedure, but in the end, what our communities experience is no one is actually experiencing consequences for their actions. We think this is, the need for a swift and certain and fair adjudication is what needs to be happening. And I think that's where we would like to go with our proposals. So first, we are looking to repeal, raise the age for 19-year-old adult offenders, and reform our youthful offender procedures to ensure accountability. As you know, in April 2025, if the legislature takes no action, 19-year-old criminal offenders will be treated like children in the family court. And because they have reached the age of majority, there is no way to hold these young adult offenders accountable for compliance with their family court conditions of release. Vermont, in addition, Vermont would be the only state in the nation to increase the age of juvenile jurisdiction to 19. So this is not a tested theory. This is an academic exercise. And we believe it's an unnecessary diversion of DCF resources from the younger age groups where these resources are most needed and making the most impact. We're also proposing changes to, yes?
Before you go on to point 2, Senator Baruth has a question.
I do. Thank you, Jay. So I'm just wanting to make sure I'm understanding you. You and the Department of Public Safety and others for a couple of years have been asking for delays. Yes. Now you're asking for repeal, is that?
Of 19-year-olds, yes. So the thing is, I think that we have made a very good faith effort to try and get this off the ground, to implement the changes that the legislature has put into policy. I think that we are not experiencing good outcomes, generally speaking, in the part of the bill that's already been implemented. DCF, as I think they explained yesterday in other testimony, basically are feeling overwhelmed by the caseload. And I think as they've testified, they are they are facing a different kind of challenge with the behaviors of some young adults. So I think that at this point, we are not looking to continue to punt and see if we can fix it. We think there's no fixing it for 19-year-olds, and we just need to move forward with allocating those resources, the intensive resources that are required, to other areas of DCF where they can be most effective.
Oh, okay, and I just wanted to follow up. You said, I think, that it was based on an untested academic theory.
Yes.
Am I remembering right that Governor Scott signed this?
Yes, Governor Scott signed it. Yes. We
Okay,
didn't
okay. I
agree
just
with
want to make sure
the
everybody
date
understands.
triggers. Yes, we did not actually agree to the date triggers that were in the bill, but you can't veto everything for every reason, right? We try and work with the legislature. We try and, this is our leadership at DCF at the time was very, very supportive of this direction. They were working with Columbia University. So we're willing to try the theory, right? We've been testing the theory, but moving the age to 19 is untested, and there is no evidence that it would be successful in Vermont, or that we have the resources to do it in Vermont.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify for people who may be watching that it wasn't that the legislature overrode the governor on this. The governor signed the bill, and then we've been asked to delay, and each time we've been asked to delay, I've been concerned that the delays were not necessarily in good faith, that they were essentially attempts to avoid implementing the policy. Now that you're asking for outright repeal, it seems like a good inference that that's what was going on. So I just want to clarify for people, this was not a crazy idea that the legislature foisted on the governor. He did sign it. And so we're willing to talk about where we go from here, but just want to clarify the history of that.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I believe that's the inference you take away. But the inference I take away is that we have been working hard to try to make it work. And we have realized that is not a program that's successful on the ground, right? Sometimes we make mistakes and we fix them. And that is what we're doing here.
Well, we did have that positive report on the first phase.
We did.
Which we got last year. So I see.
I'm not sure. I remember that. I remember that state workers coming in to talk about how they were being crushed by the first phase.
No, I'm talking about the report.
We certainly can take more testimony on this, I think, ongoing.
Rather than going back and forth, we're going to be hearing about raise the age. The House is working on it right now. They'll be sending us something, and we'll certainly be able to have longer testimony and debate about that. But I am hoping that we can, just get the full proposal from the administration and take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So second, we are looking to make changes to the youthful offender procedures to return to a system of accountability for those receiving the benefits of a youthful offender designation, and making a more timely connection between offense and consequence by keeping youthful offender cases in the criminal court as sealed proceedings. Second, we're going to continue to address the issue of repeat offenses in our community, which I think are one of the primary concerns of our communities and our constituents. We are seeking, and then you will hear more, hopefully, from Tucker Jones on what we propose to do on revising current law regarding bail revocation. This is a tool that courts and prosecutors are not currently using and that we believe could be currently using. We need clear bail revocation standards for defendants who reoffend while out on bail or repeatedly violate conditions of release. We're proposing to update our standard to meet the test for constitutionality articulated by Vermont's Supreme Court. We are again proposing universal sealing of criminal records to replace our current system of erasing them. When a record is sealed, a person who is not reoffending still has the opportunity to pursue better jobs, higher education, obtain loans, or lease an apartment, but leaves those records available for criminal justice purposes and all legally required background checks. Third, we're looking to limit the authority of the courts to suspend criminal sentences for repeat violent offenses. We understand that sometimes this is done in the interests of justice and sometimes that is necessary, and we're willing to talk about accommodations along those lines. But I think many Vermonters would be surprised to learn that sentences for violent convicted offenders are suspended, which means that an offender could be convicted, receive a sentence of 30 to 40 years for a violent crime, and then a judge can suspend the sentence and the person is released into the community with supervision. This is despite.
Just wanted to interrupt real quick. Senator Bohosky has a question.
Yes.
Possibly a question for you, Mr. Chair, or legislative council that I see in the room, but can we tell the judiciary explicitly what to do? Don't we have 3 branches of government that can't infringe upon one another?
I think that would be a question for Ledge Council. My answer would be there's some things we can tell them, others that we can't.
Can I ask Ledge Council that's in the room?
I mean, that's more or less accurate. I mean, you can't usurp the ability of your, partner branch of government. So it's a little bit of an imprecise song and dance at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So anyway, this ability to suspend is despite consideration of repeat offenses and supervision violations. So we're proposing to limit the ability of a judge to reduce or suspend the sentence of a person convicted of more than one violent crime. Fourth, this relates to waiver of extradition. Extradition isn't something that I believe that the committee has maybe discussed in the last 8 years, but I may be wrong. The Office of the Attorney General reports that 50% of extraditions requested of Vermont, so that's people fleeing to Vermont, have agreed to waive extradition, waive the right of extradition as a condition of release. Our proposal would authorize law enforcement to return fugitives from justice if they have waived extradition as a condition of release in another state. And our proposal builds in some safeguards to ensure that that has indeed happened, that they have actually legally waived extradition in the demanding state. We need to redefine recidivism to more accurately reflect returns to incarceration and create additional measures for success as well as for violent reoffenses in Vermont. And finally, the 2024 pretrial supervision program for repeat offenders was implemented in Orleans County at the end of last year. It was a statewide program as enacted, but only funded effectively for one county. And we are hoping to get some outcomes data, and we're considering our options for expansion. The last plank of the governor's public safety package recognizes the need to protect communities from the harms of drug and alcohol addiction. So first, we seek to repeal the July 1, 2025 prohibition on continued transport of disorderly and violent individuals who are impaired by drugs and or alcohol to corrections facilities. So this is a July sunset that if the legislature takes no action, it will be repealed, and there will be, in some counties, nowhere to take disorderly and violent individuals who are impaired. So we heard this from our committees, or from our communities, and we are looking to repeal that sunset. Second, and I think sort of going along with that prior repeal, is that we need to do a better job providing public inebriation beds and crisis mental health beds and resources in our counties. So we are working with AHS to come up with a drug treatment strategy to more effectively reduce drug use. I think, and I think some would agree, that meaningful action on retail theft and the crimes of disorder that we're seeing in our communities that make people feel fearful and distrustful of our systems really require effectively connecting addicted offenders to treatment and long-term recovery. So we're working with existing tools to build a system that can deliver a swift and sustained connection to addiction treatment and recovery. Our goal is to provide individuals with a seamless transition from one level of care to another into successful recovery. And ideally, this includes resources in recovery for housing and employment. So these levels of care can be paired with the AG's drug treatment diversion program, known as TAMRAC, conditions of release, and pretrial supervision. The system could also include comprehensive treatment, which includes therapy within the corrections system, to create a new and effective pipeline for successful treatment and recovery for convicted offenders. Those are the wave tops of our policy proposal, and I look forward to being more involved in presenting those as the session goes on.
Thank you. I've got a few thoughts, but Senator Mahowski.
Yeah, I completely agree that we need a pretty massive increase in mental health and substance use supports. So I'm wondering if that particular proposal will also come with a significant budgetary increase to those fields, because they have been level funded or underfunded for many decades. So I'm wondering what type of budgetary increase we can expect in terms of mental health support and housing support.
So I don't know necessarily that is true, Senator, that we need massive increases in funding. Funding is not always fixing. I think what we are doing is taking our existing systems. We're going to be looking for some amendments to our ability to match Medicaid funding. And we are going to be, adding some resources. So obviously I can't get ahead of the governor on the budget, but this is something that we're discussing now.
Thank you. I am wondering when we'll be receiving some of the draft language. I was under the impression we have some language today. I don't know if that's coming from the folks that we have presenting later, but I do think it would be great to have a starting place for some of these ideas.
Okay, that's terrific. We do have language, and I didn't know that that's what the committee was looking for today, but we do have draft language, and we will be happy to get that to Ledge Council. Is there a way to best do that?
If you are able to send it along to myself and Michelle.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. And as the governor explained yesterday, I think in his press conference, the way that we're going to be approaching this is with a single omnibus bill. And then it's your process.
Sounds good. Thank you. I will say that there are, I understand it's, coming from you as an omnibus bill. We do have a couple different moving pieces that address at least some of these issues for now, including sealing and expungement, which I think will be hitting the floor tomorrow, coming here. And then, as we discussed, the other body is addressing the raise the age bill. And yeah, we'll take it from there as to, what vehicles we'll have for these different ideas. But I agree generally that, the swift adjudication is one of the most important pieces. I think that we've heard a number of times from judges and practitioners that, the two main components of deterring crime is the likelihood of being caught and the amount of time that occurs between being caught and seeing the consequences of the charges. So yeah, I look forward to working on this and seeing what we can come up with. Committees and also thank you for your testimony. Committee,
sure,
is there
I that.
anything else? Okay.
No. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We can take a little break. We'll have some other folks from TPS coming in.